Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. We're just going to give people another minute or two to pop into the session. Hope everyone's doing well today. Feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're coming from while we wait just another minute, see if anybody else joins us. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Forum webinar series. My name is Priya Chaya. I am the Associate Director of Content here at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We are really excited today to present this webinar developed specifically for Preservation Leadership Forum members, which, as you know, is the professional membership program of the National Trust. So thank you so much for being here. We're really excited that you are members and hope that you find this webinar informative. Today's webinar is Mandeville, Louisiana's Journey to Flood Adaptation, which focuses on how Mandeville has used flood resilience over the last 18 years and 17 flood events to flood adapt hundreds of historic buildings, resulting in far fewer damages and greatly shortened recovery time. We're really glad to have experts from Mandeville here today to share their expertise. However, as always, a few technical logistics. We're going to be taking questions from the audience during the webinar, but please send them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can send them in at any point during the webinar, but we'll be waiting until the Q&A section at the end of the session to answer questions. You can also communicate with other participants using the chat function, but just make sure to put your questions in the Q&A because that helps us sort of triage everything. The closed captioning function is also enabled for the webinar. You can enable and disable it using the controls at the bottom of your Zoom screen or through your audio settings. It kind of depends on what version of Zoom you're using. And as a reminder, following the program, we'll send out recordings of today's webinar directly to the email you used to register. And as a reminder, all forum webinars are available on our YouTube channel. So if you've missed anything that we presented over the last year, you can easily find them on our YouTube channel. And finally, we ask that everyone is respectful to each other in the chat and follow our code of conduct. And Rhonda, who is basically doing my role today, will drop it in the chat in a second. Yeah, I see it right now. And so with that, I'm going to pass things along to Lauren from the city of Mandeville because we have a pretty full program today.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I am Lauren Brinkman from the city of Mandeville. I am the planner and floodplain administrator here in Mandeville. And today we're going to be talking about historic buildings and basically preservation, significance, and elevation.
Lauren, your camera is not on, just so you know.
Okay. Let me turn that on for you. Okay. Great. So I wanted to start off today with just going kind of back and starting from basics just to make sure that I put everything kind of in context. So I wanted to start off with what is historic preservation. So historic preservation involves protecting and maintaining buildings and structures and sites of historical significance to ensure they remain for future generations. This practice is based on understanding that these buildings hold cultural, architectural, or historical value that contributes to a community's identity and heritage. So I did want to also talk about what key criteria for a building that can be considered historic. So I acknowledged like 6 different things. So the first thing was historical significance. So sometimes with these buildings, you can have, whether if that's important events or whether if that's influential people that's associated with these buildings, such as political figures, artists, or leaders, or if it had a cultural impact. So if that played on development for social practices. Another key criteria for historic buildings can be architectural significance. And those things can be like design and style. So buildings with particular architectural style throughout that period. It could have architectural features that are unique and rare for that building, as well as if a notable architect designed it. Another key feature is aesthetic value. So whether if that's visual appeal and landmark status. So basically the symbolic particular location or era when that building was built, as well as historical integrity. So buildings that remain in their original designs or use their original materials, as well as the condition. So the last two key criteria that could be considered historic is it can have cultural and community value. So it can be local significance, buildings that are important to history of the local community, or structures that have just been involved in the community life or local traditions. And through that, the last key criteria is the documentation. So that's historical records. That's if you have photographs, design elements, historic accounts, as well as an official designation. So if it was included on a historic survey of a local registry or National Register of Historic Places, those things can also be recognized. So I do like to give two kind of examples of just prime example, like the Eiffel Tower in Paris. It's known for its distinctive design and role in French engineering and culture, as well as the White House in Washington, D.C. It's important for not only U.S. presidency, but its architectural design. So a majority of the time, whenever people are traveling around the world, a lot of the time they go to places that have history, and it's important to preserve the history, whether if that's just in your local town or just throughout the nation. So why should we preserve these historic buildings? They have a connection to the past. They serve as helping understand and appreciate the history and the culture and the heritage in its place. Again, like I said, it could have community identity, so it can help maintain and celebrate the unique character of that building, as well as design excellence. So it could be the architecture, craftsmanship, as well as the educational value, being able to make sure we can truly give education towards the future generations, whether if that's through construction methods, materials, or architectural styles. So I did want to start off with letting you know where we are located. So I work for the city of Mandeville. We are in Louisiana, and we're located on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain across from New Orleans. So we're kind of known as Mandeville. We're in the Bay Pontchartrain. But as you can see here, where this red star, we do get a bunch of storm surge from whether that's rain events, whether if we have a certain wind that pushes up the water in the lake, or whether if that is main storms like hurricanes that come our way. So our town, the city of Mandeville, was founded by Bernard de Marigny back in 1840. I want to give just a brief history of how we've developed as a city and where we've kind of come from and what makes us unique today. So Mandeville on the lake is what we were kind of known from, with steamboat transportation from New Orleans came, it would bring people to our town, and it was a town that had a lot of swimming, sailing, fishing, crabbing, and gaming. You can see here, these are old historic photos that we have that people used to eat, drink, sleep here, gamble, a great place kind of for a secondary vacation style location back in the late 1800s. You can see this is a photo of historic Mandeville and what it kind of used to look like. So around this time that Mandeville was founded, from the time of 1851 to 1860, Louisiana, as well as like the southeast part of our country, we had active years with hurricanes. So at that time, we had about 6 hurricanes that were stronger than a Category 3. Why that matters is because many of our historic homes were built elevated, especially after the era of early hurricanes. So this was late 1800s to early 1900s. People knew their risk, where they were living, and what type of construction had to be done. At this time, our Mandeville homes we kind of had a proportion of 2/3, which you can see here, 2/3 kind of scale on the top with 1/3 scale of piers and supporting on the bottom. So this was majority of what our historic homes have looked like in Mandeville whenever they first started building here, whenever we were founded. In 1937, we then had our seawall constructed. And why that's important is how great it was to have that seawall, because we do get that storm surge from New Orleans. I think it did kind of give false hope of what type of environment people were living in, because they really didn't see the storm surge as much if the storm wasn't bad enough. It had to get to a certain level of whether it was sea level rise or if a hurricane came to actually be able to see those effects once the seawall was put in. So, and again, all of this has to do with how Mandeville was formed. We have our Lake Pontchartrain Causeway. So this causeway was built around 1956 and 1969, and this resulted in huge growth from New Orleans to Mandeville. Our community in the 80s started booming for the next 10 years and really grew. So why that was, while Mandeville was growing, we did have some concerns whenever the causeway opened, because many of the residents from New Orleans that were moving to the North Shore, they're used to levee protection in New Orleans. Mandeville, we have gravity drainage and we just have the seawall. So with not having those levees, a lot of people didn't understand the environment that they were coming to live in. And during the late 50s and 70s, when post-World War II homes were built, a lot of them started being built slab on grade homes. So why this is important is Mandeville is a very unique community that's not only historic, but with us having those flood events, we've had to learn to really adapt to our weather conditions as well as preserving the integrity of our buildings. So I like to include this slide on a lot of the PowerPoints just because I think it gives a good eye-opening slide to let you know just the past hurricane tracks over the last 100 years of really what we're having to deal with, and something that you kind of can't escape, and you have to learn to move forward with preserving your building. So again, knowing your environment, this is a photo of our seawall whenever we have that strong wind or we have a hurricane, about how it hits that wall. You can see on the left-hand side here, this is our Lakeshore Drive. On a normal, beautiful day. And then whenever a hurricane comes and overtops the seawall. So our seawall is right at about 5.3 feet above sea level. So if the lake is high, or if we get that hurricane coming in that pushes those winds, we start getting storm surge and it literally overtops the wall here. And our entire Lakeshore Drive is flooded out, as well as several blocks within to historic Mandeville. So our historic district, you can see here, is in red. 80% of the structures in our historic district are in a flood zone. And that is really important, because I think majority of historic districts across the country are now starting to have to learn how to deal with not only FEMA regulation, but staying true to the historic intent of the building. So I think one thing to recognize is, with having our historic district in this special flood hazard area, these flood zones, that means we have to conform to FEMA's regulations when it comes to compliance. This, I just kind of included this slide just to let you know we have different flood zones in our area, and that in Mandeville, we do have higher regulatory standards for our residents. So like I was stating, because these historic buildings are in the special flood hazard area, FEMA has established different regulations and codes that you have to follow, even though that you have these historic buildings. So FEMA developed the Stafford Act, which is what governs all buildings located in a flood zone, as well as the Federal Code of Regulations, CFR 44, which again is carrying out that Stafford Act. So they do have guidance for a bulletin for historic structures that you can look at. I'm sure if you work in a community that has a special flood hazard area and you have historic buildings, this is kind of a challenge of where do you go from here when you're looking at inundation in a historic building and how to preserve them. So to continue to go down our timeline of how Mandeville came to what it is today, Hurricane Katrina was a huge pivotal point in Mandeville's history with what we needed to do. So Katrina came, and basically whenever it hit, Katrina came in 2005, this hurricane, and it traveled through the Gulf of Mexico and hit just east of Mandeville. Whenever it came, we had 8.5 feet of storm surge and water on Lakeshore Drive. That was very eye-opening, because I think that was one of the biggest storms that, you know, we had to learn how to adapt and figure out what we're going to do with these buildings. Mandeville had a bunch of damage. We lost a bunch of historic buildings. It was something that truly made our political, you know, members, as well as our local residents, their eyes open of we need to do something to protect these buildings. So in the danger of doing nothing, what could that lead after Katrina? We could have demos by neglect, structures that have been inundated that no one fixes up. You could continue to have the structure getting damaged over and over again. You can see here, this building was damaged after Katrina and then got fixed up, and is, I think it's been damaged 2 or 3 times. It is on our Lakeshore Drive, but it keeps getting inundated and having flood claims on this historic building over and over. And we're just grateful that it hasn't washed away with having this 8.5-foot storm surge several times. As well as the danger of doing nothing, new construction could distract from the character and streetscape. So by losing all of these buildings, these new construction projects coming in, we wanted to ensure our historic district it stays appropriate within the streetscape, and we're just not having all these new construction with different styles kind of pop up and change that overall streetscape of our district. So since Katrina, we have lost 84 structures, have been lost or damaged as a result of coastal flooding or storm damage. So I like to include this slide because whenever we talk about historic mitigation with a structure, I feel like you have people that are kind of on 2 sides. You know, it's a very touchy subject to talk about. People get nervous because it is very intricate with the process and understanding the appropriateness and the intent and the scale of the building, as well as, you know, some people, I feel like it's a tug of war situation. So some people say, don't elevate the building, don't touch it. The intent, value, appearance, the landscaping all needs to say the same. This is why it's historic. And then you have other people on the flip side of the coin that says, elevate and mitigate it. The thing is we know we live in a vulnerable area. We know we're going to get inundation. What we don't want is to lose the historic building altogether. So if what we have to do is elevate and mitigate it and we still save that building, then that's how we want to move forward. And that is kind of the take that Mandeville has decided on, is because we do see this inundation and we did lose so many after Katrina that we didn't want to continue going down that path and no longer have this historic district. So what happens if we don't mitigate? You know, like I just stated, we could lose these buildings, and it could be a very, very challenging in the future to keep that intent. So after Hurricane Katrina, there was a planning advisory team that came into Mandeville and really contacted various communities, basically under AICP and APA with the state. They came into the city to help do a redevelopment strategy, really within the zoning B3 area, as well as looking at our historic district. Why that's important is because whenever they were kind of coming in to look at these regulations, we had different FEMA requirements that we have to follow, right? And challenges. What we were nervous about is following Katrina, we had Hurricane Rita, we have these flood maps that we adopted. How is construction going to work? What additional costs are we going to have? Are we going to struggle with what the ground floor of these buildings look like to have access through windows, or walking, or having commercial buildings having walk-by business? Is that going to affect them if they're elevated in the air? Will raised structures, does it have the ability to have screened-in backyards and privacy, and as well as making sure that the buildings stay appropriate? And as well, we had different architectural design concerns. So we wanted to ensure that the proportion and scale of the building stayed within historic context, as well as it could be the stairs orientation, the overall height of the structure, and just understanding where you have to be to meet FEMA compliance, but to still stay within the appropriateness of the district. So this is what we were afraid of, is what we don't want is now that we have to meet these FEMA regulations and we know we want to mitigate these buildings and elevate them, us not have any design standards in place. We don't just want these buildings like this photo here, that it's just kind of on stilts. There's no really architectural features. It's not painted. There's no decorative railing. There's no screening. I mean, you can really go down a path that if you don't put something in place, you could really see the effect of that. So we did get this toolbox kind of together after Hurricane Katrina and Rita, and really took about, like, I would say about, 5 years or so in a really big growing pattern for us to develop a master plan for the historic area. We had the City of Mandeville B3 area plan developed, as well as we had a historic survey done back in 2009 just to get our inventory of our buildings since we had lost so many. And then really to develop some design guidelines. We had those design guidelines revised in 2019. And then, like I stated, the historic survey done in 2009. So this was our toolbox just to get all this together to make sure we're going down the proper path of how we want to, evolve as a city going from here. And with this, we definitely looked at the Secretary of Interior guidelines for historic preservation for Mandeville. In these guidelines, why we developed them is we wanted to intend to enable Old Mandeville to retain its historic architectural fabric, as well as allowing for the elevation of structures to be protected from flooding. So respects to this historic context, we wanted to make sure that the scale, the architectural styles, it was the greatest extent possible, as well as understanding the environmental conditions and respecting the streetscape and neighbors while doing this. So the overall goal of these guidelines are intended to help guide homeowners through the process of elevating historic buildings as we seek to strive balance between preservation of our historic neighborhoods and the need to face present day realities posed by climate change. So we developed a design review committee. This committee is basically a technical assistant committee that is appointed. It consists of architects, urban designers, landscape architects, and planners. And basically what they do is they want to ensure that all of the proposals for, if that was elevation, if that was for new construction, if that's for addition, if they're rehabilitating the building, that all of that stays within the historic context of what we are wanting for Mandeville. So Design Review Committee really looks at the architectural features and ensures that it has the proper appearance and that we're truly moving forward with proper design for these buildings. So we have the Historic Preservation District Commission as well. And this commission consists of 7 members who are appointed by the mayor that hold 4-year terms that was established in November of 2012. So Mandeville's Historic Preservation District, what their intent is intended to preserve and protect the historical worthiness of buildings, structures, sites, monuments, streetscapes, and the neighborhoods of our district. And the members consist of having public interest in the physical aesthetics of the district to promote educational and economic welfare by preserving and protecting historic buildings. So you can see our 7 members here that are currently serving. And as well, within our historic district, many local historic districts have their preservation commission review by the building permits, which help to ensure exterior alterations are compatible with the historic character of the area. So like I stated, these guidelines is what really our commission kind of follows. So in these design guidelines, I'm kind of going to go through and break down with what they kind of consist of. I know some of you are attending the webinar today. Hopefully, if you signed up for our walking tour, whenever we have the conference in October, if you're able to attend, you can really kind of see some of these in person, because we're going to give real life examples of how our historic guidelines really, get put into the design, and seeing some buildings that didn't have these guidelines in place versus us now having them with the commission, just to see how it has changed throughout the years. So One thing about design considerations for elevating historic structures is we want to consider the parking for the buildings. So you can have driveways that kind of come in and side load underneath the building versus just doing a front load. And that really makes the difference. I can show you on the next slide, kind of giving you that example, but as well as retaining and preserving the building's features for the streetscape and using screening to mitigate, screening those vehicles that are parking underneath. Here in Mandeville, because we have those flood zones and we have those structures and our base flood elevations are so high, we do have buildings that are 8, 9, 10 feet in the air. So we had to consider parking configurations to make sure it worked within our district. So I'm first going to go over the example of what I was talking about with parking. You can see here on this photograph, this car here just kind of pulled straight in underneath the building. Your eye gets kind of caught to this car rather than the historic building itself. So it really kind of takes away from the building. Versus if you see here on the left, you can see this building is elevated, but it has this nice screening here to where it covers that vehicle access. So as well as another important design feature is column placement. So you can see the columns on the actual porch continues in line all the way down with these brick supporting piers. So you can see this is a design feature in those guidelines that we really look at versus you can see this example on the right-hand side. Here is the column on the porch, but your eye kind of, takes a second look because it's not seamless all the way down. You can see the column has shifted over and really it doesn't give you that proper appropriateness and scale without having the continual like it does over here. Another feature in our design guidelines is referencing stair landings that maybe was at the original porch area. So you can see this was before the building was elevated. You can see where the porch landing is. And then once they did the elevation of the building, how it references the stair landing, the level of the original porch. You can see these porch columns and the foundation piers align, as well as a wide fascia board to kind of allow the building to properly sit on those piers. And it doesn't just look like a floating building on supporting piers. This is another example. This is the building before it was elevated and after. It really gives a good example of this craftsman style porch columns, how they're tapered, and then they kind of go down to the brick support. Your eye really elongates down with having following those design guidelines, as well as the dark screenings of the vehicle. And it has craftsman porch railing that you can see here matches with the building as it goes down the stair and the porch. Stairs is a huge critical feature in an elevated building, just due to the fact of if it's in front of the building and not painted, you can see it takes a lot of design efforts to really kind of get it correct. So that is one of those things that our design review committee helps with is stair orientation, whether that's for commercial buildings or residential, just to make sure that the stairs continue to have that appropriate look for that historic building. Another example, again, the columns and the supporting piers, how they continue to go down. The stair landing has the appropriate placement. And I just think all these buildings are really beautiful once they get elevated and they stay within the intent of the building. Again, you can see the columns and the screening here. So before anyone even starts this process, I wanted to kind of take you back of how Mandeville, how we look at this. So if someone's wanting to elevate or do a renovation, they have to first start off with our permit office and apply for a certificate of appropriateness. We have this application, and on the application, we have the resident fill out what are they proposing, what is their scope of work, and what are they wanting to do. It's important for our historic district commissioners as well as our design review committee to understand their intent and to make sure that we're getting all the information up front before any work is done on the property. So you can see that, they'll fill out, and I'm going to go over 3 different examples of really kind of how intricate a application can be. So this one was kind of handwritten and there was hand drawings, and then you'll see more of an intricate really detailed with 3D renderings that people, kind of turn in. So the different levels of applications that we kind of get. So again, you give us your description of work. And from there in our office, we reference the historic district survey. Not only do we reference it, but our historic district commissioners reference it just to understand what is the rating of the building? What is the style of the building? You can see here the rating is contributing, and the construction date was around 1900 to 1910. If it was ever on any previous surveys, as well as different styles, it just gives us a good starting point to really kind of know what building we're dealing with moving forward whenever they are proposing a change for their scope of work. So once they propose, our office goes out and we post a sign for the Historic Preservation District Commission meeting. This allows the public who's around these properties to understand what the applicant is proposing. If they have anything, any objections, any support, we send out letters to these property owners just so that they understand how the building might be changing within their streetscape in their neighborhood. So this is normally put up a week or 2 weeks before our meeting that we have, our historic district meeting, just so everyone can make time to make sure that they can make our meetings in person. So also the applicant provided existing photos of the building. So you can see this is the same building that was on our survey. And what this applicant was proposing is they wanted to restore this building for its open porch design. So there was an open porch on this left-hand side here that she wanted to basically take this off because she stated that they closed in the porch a long time ago, and she wants to bring it back to its integrity of its original kind of design. So again, here you can see the left-hand side of what she's kind of wanting to propose to do. And she turns in a sketch to us. On this sketch, you can see this open porch design, and basically she lists the material. She lists that she's not getting rid of the wood siding. She gives us dimensions. She understands the wood decking, the existing stairs, if she's going to replace any quarter boards or have existing wood supports. All of these things are very important to the historic district because whenever they are making their vote for the certificate of appropriateness, and if they feel it is appropriate, they have to verify that we're not losing these materials and that this building is truly staying historic, and that what the applicant says, we are going to hold their hand to the fire, that they are going to do that. And they're not going to do something different than what they have, applied for. So this applicant turned in 2 different renderings just so the commission could get a really good review, and went through our commission and got approved. And you can see this is where they currently are. So this applicant did a beautiful job opening up that porch, restoring this building. It was great because they also turned in this photo of kind of an example of a porch that's similar. You can see that this building is existing within our district currently. And I think for some people, maybe on our commission or just in general of residents, if they don't really know how to visualize, like what will it look like with this porch open? I don't really know, where they're going from here. It was great that the applicant was able to really get kind of a sister building that was built around the same time, have very similar architectural features, and really give that clarity to the commission of how to move forward. So again, you can see just how similar it was with the double doors and then opening that, porch up. As well as in the future, she is going to want to elevate the building. So you can see this white structure. Again, the sister building did go through a certificate of appropriateness, and they did elevate the building. So it's just a great example of how people can move forward by preserving these buildings and still keeping the scale and intent of the building. This is another example of someone who applied for a certificate of appropriateness. This one was a slab on grade house. You can see again that they did give us photos of all sides of the building before work started, and they did submit a rendering. So you can see kind of a watercolor rendering that shows this elevation of this slab on grade home. It has those piers aligned, it has the decorative railing and the screening. And it really can kind of tell the story of where they're wanting to go from here. So again, these are line drawings that we make sure on all of our line drawings that they talk about the existing materials that are staying, if they're replacing any materials, to ensure that the materials are appropriate and all of the scale, shadowing, and integrity of the building stays. So this photo, you can see this is where they currently are. The building has been elevated. They do still need to do treatment to these bottom columns as well as install their screening. And then this is the last example of how a historic building kind of goes forward for their certificate of appropriateness. So you can see on the right-hand side, some of the applicants turn in historic photographs, which is great. We get an inventory of these photographs and really being able to look at how the building, looked 50, 60, 70 years ago. And this is how it looks today. So of what they're wanting to propose by doing an addition with an elevation. Through this, they'll also give site plans to kind of tell you where the existing residence is and then how they're wanting to do an addition. So again, the applicant turned in, these were existing photographs to our commission. And you can then see this is our scale drawings of what they're proposing. This one is on our lakefront that you could see had the 8.5-foot storm surge. This was one of those buildings. And like I said, some of our applications are way more detailed. This design was done by an architect. So we do have a lot of architects that whenever they turn in their certificate of appropriateness, we're really able to get that visual to truly see what it will look like. You can see with this building being elevated 8 or 9 feet in the air, that side loading with, of course, the screening to block those cars. You can see the tapered columns, the Craftsman columns, as well as the appropriateness of the railing and the stairs. And I mean, they're keeping all of the character defining features of those rafter tails, the different pitches of the roof, and keeping in line with those support columns with the piers. And this is actually part of our rendering. We do have historic wells here in Mandeville. So we really try to encourage all of these historic wells will be eventually placed in our historic district survey, as not wanting the applicant to, demolish any of those historic wells. So you can see it there in the rendering. And this is what it looks like today. So it's great because they're in the middle of construction. You can see that 3D rendering kind of come into life. They need to put those columns in, but I mean, during construction, they've been chugging along and doing great so far. So why this matters is flood mitigation and elevation. You can see how beautiful these buildings are standing tall. They're not getting inundated with water. It really does work by elevating historic buildings. So to kind of take you back, Mandeville, we started in the National Flood Insurance Program back in the 1970s. Since then, we are now a part of a voluntary program. It's called the Community Rating System. This is a higher regulatory standard that basically allows our residents in Mandeville to get a discount on flood insurance. So by elevating these buildings, by having higher standards, whether that's with drainage, whether that's within our historic district, all these things, our residents get discounts in flood insurance. So currently right now, our city is rated a class 5, so we get a 25% discount on flood insurance. And it has really helped with a lot of the flood rates that have been changing, but especially on these historic buildings that once they do the elevation and different things, just having that flood insurance premium a lot lower for sure helps. Hazard mitigation saves. So as an example, basically off of the National Institute in Building Sciences found that on average for every $1 spent on hazard mitigation, it saves 6 in the future. So that's you're seeing it pay off investing in this building and preserving this building. So a lot of this, I think, you can truly see that it works is kind of showing you the different flood claims from Katrina, Isaac, and then Ida. So those are 3 different storms that we had. Katrina hit Mandeville in 2005. And this is just the historic district. So out of the historic district area, you can see we had $26 million in claims and damage that was reported to FEMA. Like I stated, we lost tons of building. We started putting design guidelines in, people started elevating the buildings, and we started encouraging those regulations and meeting all of that from FEMA. Once people started elevating these historic structures, you can see that basically in 2011, so really 5 or 6 years later, Isaac hit Louisiana, this hurricane, and the exact same area went from $26 million of 423 claims to 226 claims, totaling 7.5 million. You have to understand that both of these storms had 8.5-foot storm surge. They were, 9.5-foot storm surge. They were the exact same storm when it came to the storm surge that hit our Lakeshore Drive, as well as very similar with rain. So to know that the inundation areas would be the same and to just see how much those claims have gone down was dramatic and impactful. Even after Isaac, I think our Historic District Commission, once we really hit 2012, whenever our commission got established, to now present day, we've really evolved with moving forward with these elevations. And you can see Hurricane Ida hit Mandeville in 2021, and we only had 94 flood claims with $3.8 million in damage. Just seeing us mitigate these buildings, it truly pays off, and we're no longer losing the buildings. We've really had to adapt to this change and really understand where we are and how we're wanting to move forward with this preservation. So like I stated, you can see, Katrina was the 423 covering 25 million, 226 in Isaac for 7.5 million, 94 from Ida covering 3.8 million in claims. So from this, basically from 2005 to where we are from Ida of 2021, the number of claims was reduced almost in half, the damage costs that were reduced by 74% by elevating and mitigating these historic buildings. And since then, approximately 157 historic structures have been elevated since 2013, so roughly 43%. Now in our historic area, we have roughly 80% of our buildings have been elevated and mitigated. So we are very excited that, we're moving forward. And really to kind of finish up my slides, I did want to go ahead and give you some examples of showing you, these buildings up before and after, and the differences of how these design guidelines help these buildings, and how it's really changed Mandeville for the better, and how we're really adapting within our district. So that's really all I have for today. And yeah, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to hop on camera. Great. So if you haven't had a chance yet to submit questions, you can do so in the Q&A function. And Lauren, we can drop the slides so then everyone can just see you, see us. But we did have one question come in already, so I'm going to ask that one, and then we'll see if any more come in. And then I actually have some for you. So Elizabeth asks, how have you decided how high the house will be raised? Does the design review committee have any say in building height after elevation?
Yeah, so, well, we first have to look at the minimum standard. So since a lot of these buildings are located in a flood zone, sometimes with where the structure sits versus how high they have to mitigate, it might be, the structure has to be elevated 6 feet minimum. From there, you really the commission has to look at, do you have a building that's 6 foot and that's not enough area to be able to park underneath? Or do you allow them to go to that 7.5-foot height since they're already up to 6 feet to allow the utilization of parking underneath? There is other examples if a building only needs to be elevated 3 feet to meet that FEMA minimum, but they want to go up to 8 feet because they want to park underneath it. A lot of the time, the commission really, really encourages, the lower the building to keep the scale, the appropriateness of the building, the better. And I do feel like that is a constant concept that the commission has strived for with all of these cases.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I just realized that when I did the intro slides, I didn't actually introduce Kara. So Kara, if you want to take a moment, introduce yourself. Kara's also from the city of Mandeville.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am the planning director for the city of Mandeville, and So I'm just here to support Lauren today. And if y'all have any other questions, go ahead and ask.
Okay, so one of the questions I had was what was the general reception of the residents to this plan and this work?
So about elevation.
Yeah.
So I think in the beginning there was probably a little bit a hesitation, like Lauren said. But when you see the results and you are understanding that you're not scared that you're gonna have water in your house every time a storm comes, I think more and more and more people are obviously on board with this because you can see the evolution of how this has come along. And that people, I mean, every year since Ida, we've had, people apply for our grant program. We have people independently elevating. So I think that it's an evolution, right? It's scary at first, the unknown of how this is going to look, how we're going to handle this. But I think everyone's been really on board with it since. And it really takes a storm to remind people how important it is to mitigate.
Yeah, it's basically in the abstract. You can say one thing, and then when you see what's actually happening, then you're like, oh wait, this is something I should reconsider, right? So,
right.
Unfortunately, these storms are far more increasing, right? And so hopefully that's really good to know that people are now self-elevating and everything as well. Another question that Rhonda and I had actually is actually, we're gonna hold on my question. Another one just came in. Did approval of this process help with your NFIP CRS rating? And if you don't mind just explaining what those acronyms mean.
So Lauren, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so the NFIP is the National Flood Insurance Program. They are the ones that puts in the federal insurance rating maps. That's where your flood insurance is rated off of. That's where the height of your building is determined, is off of those maps. And the CRS, the community rating system of what I was talking about, that's that program that you can be in to give your residents the flood insurance discount. So did the approval of this process help? So with our CRS rating, there's different levels. So the CRS rating goes from level 10 to level 1. Higher regulatory standards in this additional piggyback program, the CRS, you do get a lot of points when there is, I guess, voluntary elevation. Whenever you are encouraging residents to elevate because you have to, whether you can really start to kind of get into if it triggers elevation for what's called a substantial improvement or substantial damage. Basically, your structure gets inundated and you have to raise it. Those do get you additional points in the CRS program. And yes, because we've started doing this, it has improved our rating. I think I showed a slide of when we started the National Flood Insurance Program and how we were a class 9 to a 7 to a 5. And really, it's just the overall concept is ensuring our drainage, our regulation, the elevation of our historic buildings, and just the district. By having all that together, it computes this score that we have that allows us to give us that 25% discount.
Great. Thank you for that. And thanks for explaining those acronyms again. So what advice might you have for other communities about the process, or in another direction, like lessons learned for elevating historic districts? I think let's start with the advice piece. Like what do you know now that you wish you had known at the start of the process?
Well, I think the historic district itself, it's important for the commission to understand what they're doing and what they're looking at. I don't think that it comes naturally to everyone to know what they're looking at and what it's going to look like. I think it's very, very, very important to have an architect on your staff or on the commission to be able to explain those intricate architectural scaling and detailing that the average eye may not catch or understand how important those little things are. I think one of the things that we're struggling with right now is, we have a lot of elevations going on And if they pour footings that are, 3 inches off, all of a sudden you have a column that's sticking out on the side of a house, or people changing as they're going and they're not checking in with the commission to make sure that those changes are approved. So we are really trying to struggle and balance when we start doing inspections. The building official isn't necessarily looking at architectural detailing there. He's looking at, safety and structure. So that's just kind of, and you just don't have a staff that can micromanage contractors. So we're trying to fine tune when we get involved and when we do inspections, so we can catch those little small things that make a huge difference in the end.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think if there would be a lesson learned, I think whenever Katrina hit in 2005, it made Mandeville's eyes open, because people just came through and demoed buildings. And, at the time, I think a lot of people were like, holy moly, we're losing all these historic buildings. Either they've been destroyed by the storm or they're demolishing it, and we have nothing in place. I think if a community is wanting to move forward with this, the biggest thing is get your plan and get your guidelines and get an inventory. Get that done first. Kind of know what you're dealing with. Know, the dates of architecture and when the building was constructed. And by having that, if you kind of have that in place, I feel that the rest will kind of just eventually fall into place. And your building will be able to be looked at from more of a, constructive side of making sure the elements and the scale and the shadowing and all of that is there, if you have those design guidelines to reference.
And I'll also add that, in the beginning, we only looked at demolitions of buildings that were surveyed that were contributing landmarks. We've changed that to where we review every demolition that's in the district, just in case something got missed off the survey. And just to and like, again, when you have your survey, the buildings are aging and faster than you can update your survey, right? So there are things that obviously in our 2019 survey that have now are 50 years older or more. So we just did that as a catch-all to make sure that we're not missing anything on our survey or things that should be on our survey.
Awesome. So I have one more question. If anyone else in the audience, we have time for one more after that. So obviously this is, for those of you coming to Pass Forward in New Orleans, this is going to be one of our field studies, which is sold out, which is very exciting. And I know this presentation was part of that field study. Can you talk a little bit about what people on the ground would see if they were coming to the field study, just so our audience has some context about what the second part of that field study might have been like?
Yeah, so the first part of the field trip, well, Rod is going to get on the bus with everyone, and he's going to do, Rod Scott, he's going to do a little history of Mandeville, history of the causeway, and then y'all will come to the Lang House, and where our Old Mandeville Historic Association president is going to speak about the Lang House. That building was moved from Lakeshore Drive to where it is now. Do a little history of that. We are going to have lunch at Rest a While. It is a historic building that was preserved. Well, actually, it's 3 buildings that were preserved and elevated. And we'll do a presentation there. And then we're going to just do a little walking tour around the area, show you some elevations, good examples that, got through before the commission. And then also we're going to take the bus back up to Ruby's Roadhouse and have a cocktail there.
That sounds great. And we just thought this, for those of you that have joined us today, we just thought this what you've seen today and heard was so important that we just wanted to make sure that it was available for our forum members to hear, even if you can't or you haven't gotten a ticket to that great field study. But thank you so much for this presentation. We just have a couple of more reminders because I don't see any other questions. So Rhonda's going to share her slides. So, oops, just a second. So, obviously I talked about Pass Forward. If you haven't registered yet, there's still time. Pass Forward's coming up in about a month. So we hope that you will join us. We also have some webinars coming up. There we go. So on October 7th is our next webinar, which is with all our esteemed leadership of the National Trust of Historic Preservation and our family of companies. It's called Activating the Power of Place. We hope you'll join us. If you go to the link that's on the website, savingplaces.org/upcoming-webinars, you'll be able to register for that. I will also be moderating that, so I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone there. And then, as I was saying, join us at Pass Forward in New Orleans, October 28th, starting October 28th and through 30th. And obviously, Mandeville's a short drive away. If you're not part of that field study, you can come and walk around yourself now that you've heard all this contextual information. And then finally, thank you so much to everyone who's come to today's webinar. Thank you to the speakers who have shared their knowledge and expertise with us. And if you have any questions following the webinar, don't hesitate to email us at forum@savingplaces.org. As a reminder, we've recorded this. We will send you a link to the recording afterwards, along with the links that were shared in the chat. So thank you so much for being forum members, everyone, and thank you for being here. Hopefully we'll see you in New Orleans.